Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel. So if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, we're here for you. I'm Ladar Gavelazi, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review. News about the discovery of the body of Hamas leader Mohammed Sinwar began to circulate shortly after Israel announced the start of its new military offensive in Gaza. The development, if confirmed by the IDF, would leave Hamas without its top commander to face the IDF onslaught. ILTV's Steve Leibovitz reports.
The IDF launched a major new military operation in Gaza, seizing key areas with tanks while continuing air assaults, reportedly killing dozens of Palestinians. Codenamed Gideon's Chariots, the offensive includes taking control of strategic areas. Troops advanced on Deir al-Balach, where ground forces had not operated during the war that began last October 7th. Troops reportedly advanced into eastern Deir al-Balach in a coordinated operation amid artillery and air cover. Mobilized forces carried out what were called extensive attacks as part of the opening moves of the operation and expansion of the campaign in Gaza to achieve all of the war's goals, including the release of the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. According to Israeli defense officials, the operation would see the IDF conquer Gaza and retain territory, attack Hamas to prevent them from grabbing humanitarian aid supplies while moving Palestinians from northern Gaza to the south. Amid the warfare, progress has been reported at mediated ceasefire and hostage talks in Qatar. Defense Minister Katz claimed the IDF offensive brought Hamas back to the table and to reportedly propose a 2-month ceasefire with U.S. involvement. Israeli and Hamas delegations traveled to Qatar last week after the release of American-Israeli hostage Idan Alexander as part of a direct agreement between Hamas and Washington, and just ahead of President Trump's visit to the Middle East. The Qatari media is reporting that the proposed 2-month ceasefire would allow time for talks to bring an end to the war. According to the Israeli media, the proposal would free about 250 Palestinian security prisoners. Hamas would hand over a list detailing the status of all remaining living and dead hostages on day 10 of the proposed ceasefire. Prime Minister Netanyahu has reportedly authorized the Israeli delegation to remain in Doha amid what is termed cautious optimism for an agreement. And there are reports that the body of Hamas leader Mohammed Sinwar has been found in a Khan Yunis tunnel, hit in the targeted strike by the IDF last week. According to a report in the Saudi media, the bodies of 10 of Sinwar's aides were found with him. Israel has not confirmed the information.
Thank you, Steve, for that report. And Israel says around 93 trucks filled with humanitarian aid, including baby food and supplies, was brought into the Gaza Strip on Tuesday, a significant boost from the 5 trucks that entered on Monday. Here's what else you need to know. More aid continues to flow into Gaza, although the United Nations is saying the aid has not yet been distributed. After an 11-week blockade of humanitarian aid into Gaza, with Israeli officials saying the aid helped Hamas, the resumption of aid was made for diplomatic reasons. 5 trucks entered the Gaza Strip on Monday, and 93 trucks entered on Tuesday, all which entered through the Kerem Shalom crossing. An official from the UN said the next step is to collect and distribute the aid through the existing system, which uses several international organizations for distribution. Meanwhile, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation mechanism is set to open later this month. For months, testimony from Gazans has revealed Hamas steals aid and resells it at an extremely high value, making it almost impossible to buy. Former Israeli officials tell ILTV they worry there's no mechanism in place to prevent Hamas from stealing aid again. The UN said on Tuesday they have not been able to secure the arrival of supplies into their warehouses and delivery points in Gaza. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Aid spokesperson said insufficient supplies is at a greater risk of being looted, but does not mention Hamas's past involvement in stealing aid. Although the spokesperson did tell reporters looted products end up being sold at exorbitant prices on the black market.
And joining us now to discuss all of this is Colonel in Reserves Miri Eisen from the Institute for Counterterrorism. Thank you, Miri, for joining us.
Thank you, Sivan. Always a pleasure to be here.
Likewise. Miri, we're hearing about the IDF advancing inside Gaza, deploying 5 divisions. What do you think are the primary objectives of this new phase, and how does it differ from the previous military operations?
We're talking about a pre-planned, coordinated 5 divisions. That's already different. I want to remind everybody in October of 2023, when we started a ground operation, it was after 2 weeks of fighting where we still didn't even know how many hostages there were exactly, how many Israelis had been killed in that initial attack of October 7th. So already we're talking about a different scale. 5 divisions is a large amount of troops. We're also talking about entering simultaneously, both in the north and in the south, and as we all heard, also in what I would call the central area of Khan Yunis. So the IDF is activating right now in different areas at the same time, and in larger scale and coordinated. That's different from the past. Having said that, all of the areas that we're operating in as of now are areas that we have been at. We're returning to areas where we went in and we went out, and now we're going in simultaneously pretty much into all of those different areas.
And at the same time, we're hearing U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff is reportedly pressing Israel and Hamas to reach a deal. What do you think are the main sticking points for both Israel and Hamas in reaching an agreement?
The first aspect is that Israel is acting right now. Hamas very much wants any kind of negotiation to be done when Israel is not acting against them in our active way. I have to tell you, Sivan, my heart goes out. We're talking right now about the 58 hostages, of which we hope 21, 24 are alive, that they are there and they're inside that same Gaza Strip in those areas that we're attacking. At the end, they're probably held underground in that subterranean arena. But the points of contention between Israel and Hamas are going to be mainly on Israel acting and stating very clearly that we're going to do this under fire, and Hamas saying, no, you have to stop before we'll do anything. And that's been a point of contention for a very long time. I absolutely think that Hamas should not be the one defining the rules of the game. That's not good for anybody. Having said that, they are the ones who hold the hostages. We want those hostages back alive. In the sneak preview, you talked about Eli Cohen, who was executed by the Syrians in 1963, and just now we're getting back some of his artifacts. His bones are still in Syria. We don't want to see any of the hostages turning into something which is hidden and not with us for so many years. And I'd say that those points in that sense, under fire, not under fire, are the main points of contention.
And now that de facto Hamas leader in Gaza, Mohammed Sinwar, has reportedly been killed, and there are basically no more living senior Hamas commanders in Gaza at his level or his brother's level, Yahya Sinwar, could this finally enable, do you think, a breakthrough for the hostages?
I hope so. Having said that, I'm very aware that Hamas has been an entity, a social movement, an educational extreme voice for so many years. They've raised a decade. They ruled there for over what we would call a generation. They were the rulers in the Gaza Strip from 2007. That's 18 years ago. So sadly, Sivan, we all need to be aware that there are other figures who are going to step in. Whoever was close to Mohammed Sinwar, additional figures that we may not have been focused on, that have grown in the last year and a half, and are the ones who are going to continue doing the fighting. So I do hope that it will bring about more of a reasonable idea. But I have to state clearly, Hamas, because its ideology is so extreme, I've never been one of those who thought that through this military pressure, we can actually make them change their mind. I am absolutely for, if you can, try to arrest them. They don't want to be arrested, so you end up killing them in that sense. That doesn't bring anybody home. At the end, you have to have somebody who is going to be the one who says, okay, you can release these people, as has happened in the past. If it's not Mohammed Sinwar, it's going to be somebody else. And again, there is no blueprint that says this is the best way to negotiate with essentially the devil, with a terror organization who prefer to execute our hostages rather than A, have us rescue them, or in any way get near them. And in this kind of a situation, you have to kind of go on it's a very thin rope, and you want to make sure that you don't push them too far. We don't want to see them killing the hostages that we have. We want to make sure that they come back. But at the end of the day, we don't want Hamas and those leaders defining the rules of the game. That's the tricky situation that we're in.
Mary Eisen, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And Israel received a stark warning from the UK, France, and Canada that, quote, concrete actions will be taken if it does not halt the war and boost humanitarian aid into Gaza. The unusual joint statement from 3 allies condemned Israel's handling of the humanitarian situation inside of Gaza and demanded an immediate halt to military operations, threatening further action if Israel refuses. The statement described the limited and approved by Israel aid to be insufficient and risks breaking international humanitarian law. Now, the statement also rejected what it called the permanent forced displacement of Gazan civilians, and 3 of the leading Israeli allies went on to say they have always supported Israel's right to defend itself against terrorists, but called the escalation entirely disproportionate. Responding to the joint statement and calling it a prize for terrorism, the Prime Minister's office said the war can end tomorrow if the remaining hostages are released and Hamas lays down its arms and Gaza is demilitarized. Now, is there growing tensions between Jerusalem and Washington? Well, reports are emerging that point to a decision made by J.D. Vance's decision to cancel a planned visit to Israel today. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
A U.S. official has denied a Washington Post report quoting unnamed sources claiming that the Trump administration would abandon Israel if it kept the war going in Gaza. In the denial, the official confirmed that there may be disagreement, but the idea that Washington would abandon Israel is preposterous. The Washington Post published quotes claiming that Trump's people are letting Israel know that the war must end. They went on to say, politically, as in the past, Netanyahu has a way to do that with a huge majority in the Knesset, but he does not have the political will. Amid the reports of differences between Jerusalem and Washington, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has canceled a visit to Israel that would have taken place today. Speaking after the Pope's confirmation ceremony in Rome, Vance said that logistics caused him to change plans, but media speculation says it was to avoid showing U.S. support for the expanded IDF operation underway in Gaza. Vance said he is sure he'll visit in the future, but not today. A visit to Israel would have been Vance's first and would have softened Israeli concerns after the Trump visit to the Middle East appeared to sideline Israel in its regional diplomacy.
And the U.S. and Israel are reportedly facing differences in policy relating to both the Gaza war and a potential Israeli strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. ILTV's Devo Klein has the latest.
CNN is reporting U.S. officials saying that Israel is preparing for a possible strike on Iranian nuclear facilities on its own, even as the Trump administration has been pursuing a diplomatic deal with Tehran. The official told CNN that such a strike would be a brazen break with Trump and could risk tipping off a broader regional conflict in the Middle East. CNN said that new intelligence obtained by U.S. suggests Israel is preparing to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. It was not clear whether Israeli leaders had made a final decision, and there was disagreement inside the Trump administration about whether Israel would ultimately decide to carry out the attack. Turning to Gaza, where, according to Axios, U.S. President Donald Trump is feeling, quote, frustrated by the ongoing war in Gaza and feels that ending the conflict is needed in order to bring prosperity to the Middle East. A Trump administration official told Axios that the U.S. pressured Israel to open the crossing for humanitarian aid after assistance had been blocked since early March and was reportedly upset by images of suffering children and babies. Axios reported an Israeli official responding that Prime Minister Netanyahu does not feel pressured on the matter by Trump. The official went on to say that if the president wants a hostage and ceasefire deal in Gaza, he needs to put more pressure on Hamas.
Thank you, Devo, for that report.
In a tragic incident in Washington, D.C., 2 Israeli embassy staff members were shot and killed outside the Capitol Jewish Museum on Wednesday evening. The victims, Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram, a young couple who were to be married, were leaving a diplomatic event when they were attacked. The suspect, identified as 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, was apprehended at the scene. Authorities are currently investigating this incident.
The devastating shooting occurred outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., resulting in the deaths of the 2 Israeli embassy staff members. The Israeli embassy in Washington identified Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Milgram as the victims of this deadly terror attack outside the city's Jewish museum. A man and a woman in their late 20s who were meant to be married and had just attended a young diplomat's reception hosted by the American Jewish Committee. Additional people at the site are reported to have been wounded. The suspect, 30-year-old Elias Rodriguez from Chicago, was seen pacing near the museum before the attack. He allegedly opened fire with a handgun, striking the couple at close range. After the shooting, Rodriguez entered the museum, where he was detained by security personnel. During his arrest, he reportedly shouted, "Free, free Palestine," indicating a political and ideological motive. Law enforcement officials, including the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, are treating the incident as a potential hate crime and are conducting a thorough investigation. U.S. leaders swiftly condemned the attack. President Donald Trump, posting on Truth Social, said the killings were based obviously on anti-Semitism and declared that hatred and radicalism have no place in the United States. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio also denounced the violence, stating on X that this was a brazen act of cowardly, anti-Semitic violence, and that the U.S. will track down those responsible and bring them to justice. The young couple who was killed both worked for the Israeli embassy. Yaron Lishinsky, a non-Jewish native of Germany, served as an assistant in the Israeli embassy's political department in Washington, D.C. Sarah Milgram, a Jewish American from Kansas, was part of the embassy's public diplomacy department. Before her position in Washington, she contributed to Tech to Peace, an organization dedicated to fostering dialogue and cooperation between Israeli and Palestinian youth through technology and entrepreneurship. This tragic event has sent shockwaves through both the diplomatic and Jewish communities, highlighting the persistent threats faced by Israeli representatives abroad.
We now turn to our Epoch Times producer, Caris Rehea, who is currently in Washington, D.C., outside the Capitol Jewish Museum, the site of a tragic shooting that claimed the lives of these 2 Israeli embassy staffers. She joins us with the latest updates on the investigation and community reactions. Thank you for joining us.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for covering this. It's, I was up late last night and I heard the news, and even though we are hearing news like this every day from Israel, there's sort of an expectation of hearing it out of the Jewish state, right? There's an imminence to it. We are always haunted by it, but you don't really feel like it could happen so close to you. So there was a very visceral reaction, and especially having just been at the Jewish Museum weeks ago, it's just surreal.
Now, what details have emerged about this horrific terrorist attack and about the suspect? Maybe you can even show us around you.
Sure. Well, it's hard to get closer than this. The Jewish Museum is about a block away, and you can see that the street is just completely cordoned off. So you can't even really see the building. The road is closed on all sides, so there's no way to get to it. But from what I understand, the shooter, his name was Elias Rodriguez. He's a 30-year-old from Chicago. He's of Latino Hispanic origin. And he actually, after he shot these 2 beautiful Israelis who were working at the Israeli embassy and attending an event for AJC at the Jewish Museum, he actually just walked into the museum. I guess he threw his gun in the bushes and walked in and said that he witnessed the shooting and wanted to have some water. And so, people were actually just talking to him there, not thinking that this was the perpetrator. And then, lo and behold, he started shouting, "Free Palestine, there is only one solution, Intifada revolution." People, I guess, realized that this was the shooter, and they arrested him on the scene. We know that he has also been part of some sort of, communist liberation, neo-Marxist group, and that he held fringe, radical left-wing views. This is the perfect person that if he was in Judea and Samaria or Gaza, he would have been recruited by Fatah or Hamas to blow himself up. And yet we're seeing this radicalization here in DC in America, right next to 5 minutes from the White House. It shouldn't be happening here.
Caris, thank you very much for this input, and Keep safe.
Thank you.
And speaking of tunnels, as reports continue to detail the horrific suffering of Israeli hostages in them, an Al Jazeera reporter toured an underground tunnel with Hamas terrorists in a video released on Tuesday. Al Jazeera reporter Mustafa Sethtan was led through a narrow tunnel by Hamas terrorists armed and with their faces covered. In the video, the reporter was guided with a blindfold on by armed terrorists into the narrow tunnel and is heard saying it was difficult for him to breathe. They arrive into a small room where you can see the reporter barely being able to stand up completely in the tunnel. He interviewed the armed terrorist who told him the tunnels are for, quote, temporary stay until Israel attacks them. However, one terrorist did say if Israel expands the fighting, they, quote, will be found throughout the entire Gaza Strip. Now, the terrorists say they had no shortage of weapons and that they're, quote, preparing ambushes to kill Jews and expel them from our land, end quote. That was all heard on Al Jazeera.
For more of the latest updates from Israel, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app. That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.